He was a billionaire who thought he owned the world. She was a judge who refused to be bought. When he refused to stand in her courtroom, he thought it was just another power play. But what happened next shocked the nation. This is the story of justice, defiance, and one woman who stood tall when the system tried to silence her. Stay with us. The air inside Courtroom 17B was thick with anticipation. Journalists filled every seat, cameras were positioned behind velvet ropes, and a subtle buzz ran through the crowd. At the center of it all sat Julian Mercer, the billionaire tech mogul accused of orchestrating the largest investor fraud in New York's modern history. Dressed in a custom-tailored charcoal suit, Julian reclined in his chair like he owned the place. Because for most of his life, he had owned places like this. To the untrained eye, Julian was charisma personified. But behind that pearly grin and polished image was a ruthless mind, a man who built empires by stepping over others. His arrogance wasn't an act, it was his nature. When the bailiff called out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Naomi Shepard," the entire courtroom stood out of reflex, except Julian. With arms folded and legs casually crossed, he didn't even glance toward the bench. "I don't stand for anyone," he muttered loudly, just enough for his voice to echo. Gasps rippled across the room. Reporters blinked. The prosecutor tightened his grip on his pen. Julian Mercer had just dared to challenge the most formidable judge in the state, and the room braced itself for what came next. Judge Naomi Shepard didn't flinch. She walked gracefully to the bench, her black robe flowing like silk armor, her eyes steady. A former federal prosecutor and Harvard Law graduate, Naomi was known for her discipline and for never entertaining nonsense in her courtroom. She took her seat with poise, tapped her gavel once, and looked directly at Julian. "Mr. Mercer," she said coolly, "you seem to believe that this courtroom and the law bend to your will." Julian smirked but said nothing. Naomi's voice didn't waver. "If you refuse to recognize the authority of this court, then this court will no longer recognize you. Bailiffs, escort Mr. Mercer to the holding cell. He may return when he remembers how to behave." For the first time, Julian's smile faded. His lawyers sprang to their feet in protest. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," but the gavel slammed down again, hard. "No one is above this court," Naomi said, her tone final. "Not even the mighty Julian Mercer." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as two bailiffs approached. Julian stood quickly, defiant but rattled, muttering under his breath as he was escorted out. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled. And Naomi? She opened the case file, unbothered. The holding cell was cold and unforgiving. Julian Mercer had never been in one before. The steel bench dug into his back, and the stench of disinfectant clung to the air. This wasn't a VIP holding room. It was standard, just like any other criminal awaiting trial. Hours passed. Julian sat in silence, seething. His phone privileges were revoked. His assistant couldn't get through. His attorneys, frustrated, were ignored. The billionaire who once dined with senators and celebrities was now just inmate number 34891. His lawyer, Thomas Wexler, paced the hallway outside the cell, his voice hoarse with concern. "Julian, you don't get to mock the court and walk away clean." "She humiliated me," Julian spat. "She's not playing your game," Wexler said. "She's playing hers, and she's got all the power." Julian looked away. He had always known how to manipulate systems. But this was different. He wasn't facing just a judge. He was facing a woman who had spent her life fighting powerful men like him. And for the first time, he realized she might actually win. The next morning, Julian entered the courtroom again, this time standing before Judge Shepard with forced civility. "Your Honor," he said, the words tasting bitter. She nodded. "Now that we've established basic respect, let's move on to your real issue. 8 federal counts of conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction." But Naomi wasn't naive. She knew this wasn't over. That same afternoon, a new face appeared. Preston Callahan, a high-profile attorney known as the Fixer. Dressed in an immaculate 3-piece suit, Preston entered with swagger, flashing credentials, and a fresh motion to represent Julian Mercer, replacing Wexler entirely. Naomi narrowed her eyes. Preston had worked for oil tycoons, defense contractors, men with deeper pockets than scruples. Julian smirked in the gallery. "Your Honor," Preston said with calculated charm, We move for immediate bail reconsideration and a separate motion, recusal. We believe Judge Shepard cannot remain impartial. The courtroom gasped. Naomi gripped her gavel but didn't speak. The game had just changed. That night, Naomi returned home to find an envelope wedged in her front gate. Inside, a note in thick black ink read, "Step down or else." She stared at it, unmoved. This wasn't the first threat she'd received in her career, but this one felt different, closer, personal. She called Detective Langley, a trusted friend in law enforcement. He was at her door in under 20 minutes. "This has Mercer's stink all over it," Langley muttered. Naomi nodded. "Then it's time I hit back." The next morning, her legal clerk delivered a USB drive to a journalist at the New York Herald. Inside, evidence of Julian Mercer's offshore accounts, buried settlements, and a history of witness tampering. By noon, the media had shifted. The headline read, "Mercer Empire Built on Lies and Blood." Julian's smirk would not last. Courtroom 17B was chaos once again. Protesters stood outside with signs. Cameramen shouted questions. Naomi entered the courtroom flanked by security officers, but calm as ever. Julian's new team had come armed, filing formal complaints and accusing Naomi of targeting successful men. But she didn't flinch. "We will proceed," she said. "No delays, no distractions." Her voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. But behind the scenes, Preston Callahan had another card to play. At 10:17 a.m., the doors burst open. A man in a suit, unfamiliar to the court, stormed in. "We have evidence Judge Shepard has a financial conflict of interest," he claimed, an anonymous source, a whistleblower. The courtroom held its breath. Naomi stood. "You want a war?" she said. "You just got one." Within hours, Naomi Shepard's name trended on every major news outlet. "Biased black judge targets tech billionaire?" blared one headline. "Judicial overreach or revenge?" asked another. The media war had begun, and Julian Mercer was winning. The allegations were false, but that didn't matter. Preston Callahan's team had dug up unrelated rulings, twisted quotes, and even manipulated social media posts from years ago. They painted Naomi as a radical activist judge bent on punishing powerful men. Inside her chambers, Naomi sat with David Lynn, her chief clerk and former law student. "They're setting the narrative," David said. "We have to fight back." Naomi looked up from her notes, eyes sharp. "Then we leaked the truth." Within the hour, a second packet of documents was delivered anonymously to the Herald. It contained court transcripts, sealed testimonies, and financial records exposing how Julian Mercer intimidated whistleblowers and bribed regulators. By nightfall, public opinion began to shift. But Preston wasn't done. He filed an emergency hearing to suspend Naomi from the bench. The court date? 2 days away. The next morning, the courtroom overflowed with tension. Protesters clashed outside. Inside, Julian arrived smirking, flanked by Callahan and a new entourage of bodyguards. Naomi took her seat behind the bench, unreadable as ever. "All rise," the bailiff called. Everyone stood. Julian did too, but mockingly, slow and exaggerated, like a child mocking a teacher. Naomi ignored him. "Proceed." As the prosecutor began outlining a motion to revoke Julian's bail, the air was shattered by a single sharp bang. A gunshot. Screams filled the room. Reporters ducked. Security rushed forward. Naomi instinctively crouched behind the bench, her pulse thundering. Within seconds, the courtroom was evacuated. No one injured. But the shooter vanished. Security footage showed the shot came from the gallery, right where Mercer's people had sat. Detective Langley was called in. "Message shot," he told Naomi grimly. "They wanted to scare you, not kill you." She nodded. "Then let's scare them back." Naomi met Chief Justice Roland Hayes that evening in a private chamber. "You need to recuse yourself," he said quietly. "The optics. This could take down the entire court." Naomi stood firm. "If I step aside now, Julian Mercer wins. He'll do this to every judge who dares to hold him accountable." Hayes hesitated. "Then play smart. Fight with facts, not fury." She nodded, already planning her next move. Back in her office, Naomi drafted a public statement. The next morning, it was front-page news. "I will not back down. Justice is not for sale, no matter how loud the money screams." The public rallied behind her. Hashtags trended. Howard stand with Shepard and Hasha justice is black too. Julian Mercer saw it. And for the first time, he wasn't smiling. The trial resumed under heavy security. Naomi's gaze landed on Julian. Mr. Mercer, the court is prepared to proceed. Preston Callahan rose. Your Honor, before we continue, we renew our motion for recusal based on recent security breaches and media bias. Naomi raised an eyebrow. Motion denied. The only one creating bias in this courtroom is your client. Then she turned to the prosecutor. Call your next witness. It was Jordan Castillo, a former Mercer employee who had disappeared 6 months ago. His testimony had been presumed lost, but Naomi had found him. Jordan walked into the courtroom with guarded eyes, glanced at Julian, then spoke into the microphone. Julian Mercer told us to cook the books. He said, they'll never touch me. I own half of Washington. The gallery gasped. Julian's jaw clenched. Naomi leaned forward, voice calm but deadly. Mr. Mercer, you once refused to stand for this court. I hope you're ready to fall instead. Jordan Castillo sat on the stand, nerves visible but voice clear. For months he had lived in hiding, fearing Mercer's reach. But Naomi's personal security team had tracked him down and guaranteed his safety. He spoke about the fake earnings reports, offshore laundering, shell companies, and silent payoffs. We knew it was illegal, he said, his voice shaking. But when your boss controls everything from payroll to prosecutors, you stay quiet or you disappear. Julian leaned forward at the defense table, eyes burning. Callahan objected twice, once on relevance, once on hearsay, but Naomi overruled them both. This testimony goes to the heart of the conspiracy, she said. Let him speak. The courtroom hung on every word. The media outside was already exploding. Live tweets quoted Jordan in real time. And when he finished, Naomi looked directly at Julian. Anything to say, Mr. Mercer, she asked. Julian shrugged. He's a disgruntled ex-employee. Naomi didn't respond, but she didn't need to. The tide had turned. That night, Judge Shepard's childhood home in Newark was vandalized. Red paint across the brick wall read, Traitor. Her younger sister called, crying, Naomi, what are you doing? These people, they're dangerous. Naomi stayed silent for a long time, then finally whispered, I'm doing what Dad taught us. Never let fear silence the truth. The next morning, she returned to the courthouse surrounded by supporters. Dozens of citizens had formed a peaceful circle at the steps, holding signs that read, Justice has a spine. Her name is Naomi Shepard. Inside, the court reconvened. Preston Callahan was waiting. Your Honor, he said, in light of security concerns and increasing threats, we respectfully request this trial be declared a mistrial. Naomi's gavel slammed. Request denied. You create the chaos, then beg for escape? No, we finish this. Julian's face tightened. Callahan's hands curled, and the courtroom cheered. Julian Mercer wasn't done. Back in his holding cell, he spoke with a visitor in hushed tones, a clean-cut man in a blue tie. No name was given, no paperwork filed, but Naomi's team was watching. That night, a story broke accusing Naomi Shepard of having personal relationships with prosecutors in her court. Completely false, but damaging. The public roared again. Hashtags flipped sides. Naomi trended, but not kindly. She sat in her office reading the report. No tears, no rage, just strategy. David Lynn walked in. I know who leaked it, he said. Callahan's fixer. We traced it. Naomi stood. Then it's time we expose him. The next morning, David handed Naomi a sealed file. Inside, Callahan's past cases, many of which had resulted in overturned convictions due to buried evidence, coerced witnesses, and unethical behavior. She didn't speak. She simply passed the file to the federal prosecutor's office. That afternoon, the courtroom doors opened, this time for FBI agents, walking straight past the gallery to hand Preston Callahan a subpoena. You are being investigated for legal misconduct and conspiracy to obstruct justice, one of them said. Gasps rippled. Preston's face went pale. Julian turned to him, eyes wild. What the hell is this? But Preston said nothing. Naomi smiled softly for the first time in days. Mr. Mercer, it appears your legal team just became your liability. Naomi called her final witness, Angela Brooks, a single mother who had lost everything investing in Mercer's startup fund. She held back tears as she spoke. I believed in his pitch. He said it was safe. He said I'd be able to send my son to college. We lost our home. My son sleeps on a couch now. The room was silent. No movement, no whispers, just grief. Julian Mercer didn't look at her. He stared at the floor. Angela turned to Judge Shepard. I don't want revenge. I just want to know that people like him can't ruin lives and walk away. Naomi's voice was low but resolute. That's what justice is for, Mrs. Brooks, and justice is watching. Outside, the public once again changed tune. This wasn't about race or power or bias. It was about right and wrong. The defense made one last effort. A younger associate, clearly not Preston Callahan, rose and attempted to discredit Angela Brooks. You claim Mr. Mercer promised your investment was safe, he said. But do you have a signed document saying that? Angela hesitated. No, he looked me in the eye. That was all I needed. Then isn't it fair to say your trust was misplaced? Naomi Shepard interjected. Counselor, she said, her voice like steel, you will not blame victims in this courtroom. Ms. Brooks placed her trust in a man who exploited hundreds like her. Your tone is noted and rejected. The associate sat down, red-faced. Angela stepped off the stand with her dignity intact. The gallery, packed with victims, silently nodded as she passed. The momentum had fully shifted. Naomi had regained the room. I am in the room and the public. After 5 weeks of testimony, crossfire, threats, and explosive revelations, the jury returned. Julian Mercer stood, hands folded, his jaw tight. The foreperson spoke. On all counts of fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty. Shockwaves passed through the gallery. Some wept. Others clapped silently. A few gasped. Julian's face twisted. This is a joke, he muttered. This is a damn witch hunt. Naomi didn't even raise her gavel. Mr. Mercer, she said, the only joke here is that you believed yourself untouchable. That delusion ends today. Julian was handcuffed on the spot. This time there were no cameras he could smile at. The sentencing hearing drew global attention. Judge Naomi Shepard looked directly at the man who once refused to stand for her. You manipulated families. You intimidated witnesses. You tried to destroy the system meant to hold people like you accountable. Julian sat stone-faced. Yet even after you were caught, you used lies, violence, and a nationwide smear campaign to undermine this court. She paused, letting the words hang. I sentence you to 35 years in federal prison, no parole. Your assets will be liquidated to repay victims. Every dollar, every cent. The room erupted, not in noise, but in relief. Closure, vindication. Julian's face cracked. He didn't cry, but his shoulders fell. Naomi tapped the gavel once. Justice is not about power, it's about truth. Julian Mercer was transferred to a maximum security facility the following week. His empire collapsed within days. Board members resigned. Stocks plummeted. Offshore accounts were seized. Private messages leaked. No one wanted to be associated with him anymore. Judge Naomi Shepard returned to work quietly, but she was no longer just a judge. She was a symbol of strength, balance, and courage. The media that once questioned her now praised her resolve. And the victims? They began rebuilding, slowly, but with hope. Angela Brooks' son re-enrolled in college. Jordan Castillo moved into protected housing and began testifying in other financial abuse cases. A storm had passed, and justice had stood tall in the eye of it. Months later, Naomi sat on a panel at a legal conference. A young black law student raised her hand and asked, Judge Shepard, how did you stand firm when so many people wanted you to break? Naomi smiled, thoughtful. Then she said, when someone refuses to stand for justice, you don't lower yourself. You stand taller. Because the moment you bend for power, you lose what makes justice sacred. The room went quiet. That quote would go viral. It would be painted on murals, printed on shirts, and echoed in lectures. But Naomi didn't care for fame. She cared that the next time someone like Julian Mercer entered a courtroom, they stood. No one, not wealth, not reputation, not arrogance, can shield you forever from accountability. Justice does not bend for ego, and respect is not optional in a system built to protect the vulnerable. When we stand firm in the face of intimidation, We do more than deliver verdicts. We restore faith in what's right.